just what are the biggest hurdles in terms of making deals that maybe the common NBA consumer who doesn't really have time to get into the weeds of all this, like what are the hurdles that they probably don't understand or are overlooking?
The most obvious ones are the rules, the new rules, especially for teams that already have pretty high payrolls, all the apron rules. And what makes it even more confusing is how you've got two different levels. So you can do certain things if you're over the first apron, and then you could do certain things if you're over the second. So that's number one. But then the other thing I think even more concerning is just not so much the rules, because a lot of people want to blame the rules on what makes the trade so complicated. Just the fact that there are so many expensive teams that are subjected to these rules. And then even with the teams that are, not in there, there's still other teams that are like pretty expensive, pretty close to the tax. So they have their own limitations as well. So there's like very few teams that actually have the flexibility to take on a lot of payroll and actually use some of the looser new trade rules that let non-expensive teams easily increase their payroll. So I think the biggest change is that there's going to be more multi-team trades. I don't think these everything that's changed necessarily is going to stop certain deals from getting done. If there's a deal to be made, I think it'll get done. I just think now you're going to have to make these trades bigger, because if you got two apron teams trying to make a deal together, chances are they can't just do a two-team trade because both teams can't increase their payroll. Okay, so you're gonna have to get a third team involved. So I think you're just adding, for the most part, extra steps for these trades to eventually get done.
But overall, okay, so basically since 2017, I believe, every year we've had a double digit amount of trades at the deadline, just at the deadline. So this isn't including, for example, a couple years ago when a couple days before the deadline, Kyrie Irving goes to Dallas out of nowhere. It's not including that. The day of, there's always a lot of activity. We've seen 10 teams, or we've seen actually 19 teams involved in 10 deals or whatever the case may be. And more than that, even like there have been years where 20 or more teams, which is two-thirds of the league, have been involved, even more than that. So you don't think that this is going to prevent that? This is just going to make teams, I guess, like Washington, Brooklyn, Detroit, Charlotte, just facilitators, and they're going to have to just get involved and be like, hey, can we get some draft pick compensation for our troubles, as opposed to these 1v1 deals where, for example, Phoenix and Miami, which is probably the big one, Miami doesn't want to take back Bradley Beal, but even if they wanted to, it probably wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world for Phoenix. Like they would still have to move around, so to speak. So can you just outline what some of these kind of deals could look like for some of these players?
So on a basic level, let's say it's just Jimmy Butler trade to Phoenix. If you can get a team like Detroit to help, where maybe they take on Beal and the Heat just take on expiring contracts and some of those draft picks from the Suns, and the Suns get Jimmy Butler, that helps both the Heat and the Suns to get this done, because neither team can increase their payroll right now. Both teams are going to want to reduce payroll, so the Pistons have a bunch of cap space. But it's probably going to take even more teams. If you can get like a second team with more flexibility, that'll help too. Because for two teams like the Suns and the Heat that need a decreased payroll, it might take a couple extra teams to help allow them both to reduce the amount of payroll they're gonna need to make this deal work.
Do you ultimately think that the CBA is going to scare off some teams potentially? Like, there are going to be teams that want to not get into that second apron, potentially get away from even the first apron or whatever. Like, are we going to see moves like that where they're just basically clearing out the books, financial stuff where it looks boring on the surface, but it scoots a team away from the luxury, or not the luxury tax, but the second apron, so that they can be able to do things to maintain their flexibility down the line?
I guess we'll see. We're still pretty new to this, and we already kind of have seen that a little bit. Like when the Wolves traded Towns, that's them deciding a year in advance, hey, let's get off the salary now because we're gonna have these restrictions later. They didn't really save any money for this season with that trade. So That might be like one of the bigger examples, and then we'll see like if, for example, the Celtics they decide to do something. So far, the Suns have been the only team that haven't run away from it.
Well, their owner is playing a dangerous game. I mean, and they have new owner syndrome, as Bill Simmons will call it in Phoenix. How fearful do you think, understanding the salary cap, how fearful do you think teams should actually be of the second apron?
I don't think they're as fearful as I expected them to be. You're gonna have a couple teams this year finish over it, and but again, we're still too early because this is the first year where the rules are getting into effect, and so you're gonna have teams like the Wolves, Celtics, a couple others. They're gonna have their draft pick 7 years in the future frozen,
Hmm.
which isn't such a big deal because if they stay below the second apron in like the next 3 years, then that it gets unfrozen. But then the other big penalty that happens is that if they stay over the second apron again in like one of the following 3 years, then that same pick drops to the end of the first round. So that one is going to be a lot more. That's probably the one that we still have yet to see just how fearful teams will be because we're not there yet. But as far as staying over the second apron just to get the pick frozen, I feel like some teams aren't. They're not as fearful, especially like if you're a team like the Wolves, for example.
Hmm.
They already traded their 2031 first round pick to get Rob Dillingham. So technically, they can't trade their 2032 pick anyways. So that one's going to get frozen. So for them, it's probably not a big deal because they wouldn't be able to trade it anyways. But now they're but if they stay over the second apron again, they run the risk of having a drop. So I think they're trying to prevent that. I don't think they want to have it just go to the end of the first round. And next year they'll have a pretty balanced cap sheet after trading Towns.
Is there something that, as people are having fun with the trade machine and moving this player for this player, and hey, I just sent Jimmy Butler here, or I just sent Zach LaVine here, in all the excitement for that, is there something that people are overlooking? Maybe it's a rule, a stipulation that the trade machines haven't factored in when making these deals.
Um, I don't know because I don't really use trade machines. I'll just use Fanspo just because how visually it looks. But for the most part, I just do everything through my Excel. So, and the reason I do that, I guess this would answer your question, is
Yeah.
because then it can, I can tell if a team, let's say they are subjected to aprons or they're ideally trying to avoid the tax. I can know for sure. I don't know if the trade machines tell you for sure if the teams are achieving those goals. And then the other thing would be that some players, and this is more like on the technical side, but some players have trade bonuses. I don't know if the trade machines tell you that because trade bonuses change every day if a player has one. And I have that information. I can know exactly if a certain player was traded today, how that would change your salary. A couple other, and then there's like even more technical than that. Some players have bonuses that might change what their salary is presently uh, based on the team they go to. So there's small stuff like that, which are pretty rare, but
Hmm.
for the most part, I feel like some of these trade machines do enough to help. It's really hard to have them be perfect, but I think it seems like they do enough to help get these trades to work.
What's the biggest misconception overall of the new CBA? Like the thing that people are super fearful of, but when you sort of read tea leaves and read into it, you're like, you shouldn't be this scared of this part of it.
Um, I think I kind of touched on it with the second apron stuff because I don't think teams are going to be quite as fearful as we initially thought. I guess though the biggest thing are which hasn't happened yet, are going to be the new tax rates because the bigger reason why a team like the Celtics might have to change things up is how much more expensive the team is going to be
Hmm.
because they're going to have, if they keep the same roster rolling over into next season, they're going to have like a half a billion team, maybe close to like 600 million. And that's mainly because now they're going to be in the repeater tax. That's what happens when you're in the luxury tax for so many years. So they have higher rates, but then also they're increasing the rates starting next season for teams that are deep into the tax. So now their multiplier per dollar is just going to skyrocket. And they also have a new owner coming in. We don't know what they're spending,
Nope,
how much
that's
they want to
important.
spend.
That's important.
Yeah, but that's I think we don't know where the lines are going to be yet because that's a lot of money. But on one hand, we've seen teams be willing to spend over 100 million. Close now, the Suns are spending like 200 million in tax. So as the cap's increasing, okay, we're starting to see the rate in which teams are willing to spend into the tax also going up.
Hmm.
So maybe there's going to be some type of world where okay there could be teams willing to spend like 250 300 million into the tax, which would get them, the Celtics and Suns, to that 500 million dollar roster type number when you combine with their payroll. So that, I think, more so that just because we haven't seen it yet, we've yet to see how those increased tax rates are gonna increase affect team building, because that could force a team to alter their window a little earlier than they hoped.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that right after they won the title, Wick was like, "All right, we're selling the team. We're getting ready to find new buyers for the Celtics." After looking at their cap sheet, it's like, "Oh, this team's going to be hard to keep together." And I think they got their title, and they probably don't want to deal with those problems.